had the licensing lady call me up one time. She said, "I just made the greatest deal for Wonder Woman." And I said, "Gail, we don't own Wonder Woman." What do you mean we don't? I said, "That's DC. Maybe you should like find out who we own."
This Organized Chaos video is brought to you by Gems Art Studio. Gems Art Studio is an online store that allows access to prints that you can use for most anything, obviously as just a picture, or as a wallpaper, or as a bookmark, or anything you can think of. You can find Gems Art Studio at etsy.com/shop/Gems Art Studio. This video is also brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you.
I'm Jim Shooter. I've been around in the comic biz for 57 years. So if anything happened in the last, since 1955, I probably know something about it. They're sorting this out. Does anybody have any questions I can answer? Funny stories I can tell you? Anything? What's my reading these days? Basically, I got friends in the biz, well, obviously, and they'll occasionally recommend something. Send it to me. Sometimes it's like, oh, you got to read this, and sometimes it's like, you can't believe what you're reading this. And but so it's sporadic. The last batch of comics I got was from Eric Stevenson, Image Comics. He sent me a bunch of stuff. Some was really good. I like that Saga book. That's really well done. And some other ones of his. Nowhere Men, a couple others. Pretty good. That's the last stuff I read. I read a lot of little indie stuff too. Just read an indie comic. It's called Red, White, and Broke. It's about sort of a Superman-like superhero character, except that he's trying to make a living. He's busy always catching falling airplanes and stuff like that. And against me, he's doing crowdfunding and stuff. It's hilarious. It really is. It's good stuff. Anybody else? Another question?
What's your favorite?
Pardon me. What?
What's your favorite comic book you ever wrote?
Favorite comic book I ever wrote? I'd have to say it was the first 7 issues of Harbinger, which is kind of a complete arc. And I was working with this guy, David Lapham, who was a genius, and he gave me everything I asked for and some extra besides. And it was a real fun ride. I thought that was maybe one of the most enjoyable things. You got a question, sir?
Yeah, for someone getting into comics, where would you say is a good start?
If you want to get into comics, where do you start? It's very hard these days. The big companies don't look at submissions. So your choices are, there's 2 things that will cause them to become aware of you. One is exposure, and the other one is success. So if you self-publish and it starts to take off a little bit, then they want to hear from you. The cheapest way to self-publish is online, obviously. That works. Another thing to do is write your stuff, create your stuff, and give it away online. And then what you have is well, it's like J.K. No, not J.K. Who's the lady who wrote the 50 Shades of Grey? That lady. What she did is she couldn't get a publisher to save her life. So she gave it away online the first several chapters. All of a sudden she's getting 1 million page views, a month. Then all the publishers want to talk to her, right? And now she's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So regardless of the subject matter, the fact is that's how you do it. You get exposure, or you have success, and then you have a story to tell, and then they want to talk to you. Because no one at the big publishers is ever going to get fired for hiring a John Byrne, but they might get fired for hiring you if you don't work out. So they all want to keep their phony baloney jobs, and and also they're risk averse. They're so afraid they're going to look at somebody's samples, and there's going to be some idea in there that coincidentally they come up with the same idea in the movie next year, and then that person will sue them. So they don't want to be sued, so they just think the best way to avoid that is just don't look at the sample. And so that's what you're up against. Any other questions?
How did you keep from being when you first got into writing Legion of Superheroes at such a young age, how did you keep yourself from being overwhelmed by being so young and being in comics?
I was too stupid to be afraid. He said, why, how could I not be overwhelmed when I started? I was 13 when I started, and I didn't know that, that was a stupid thing to do. So I wrote scripts and sent them to DC Comics, and the editor liked them. I lived 400 miles away, so it wasn't like he could say stop by the office. He thought I was a college student. And he looked at my first 3 stories, liked them, and he called me up and said, we're going to buy these, we're going to start using you as a regular writer. I said, oh, okay, great. So your first assignment is Supergirl, 12 pages next Friday. Okay. So I worked my way through high school. They kept me busy every minute they could. And the reason I wasn't overwhelmed is that I didn't have time to think about it. And going to school all day and writing comics all night. And then I also, like I said, I didn't know I was supposed to be afraid. I just, did the best I could, and made the cut apparently, and learned a lot. Got better. Got to work with some great people: Mort Weisinger, Kurt Swan, Wally Wood, Gil Kane. I mean, the who's who of people, and I've listened to every word they said. Anyway, another question.
About for the creative process, about how long did it take you to kind of come up with the story and put pen to paper and
How long did it take me to come up with a story and put it on paper? You're talking back at the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, sometimes I already had a story in my head. One time the editor called me up and he said, I need a Superman story. You got any ideas? And I said, can I use the Flash? He said, he was the boss there. He said, I can arrange that. So I did the first race between Superman and the Flash. I've been thinking of that story since I was 6 years old, the first time I ever saw a Flash comic book. I thought it was great. That was in Showcase back in 1956, 7, something like that. Anyway, I loved the Flash, and of course, as a little kid, it was first grade. You had to wonder, well, Superman has super speed too. Who's faster? So I had in the back of my mind for years. I used to draw in my little notebook Superman and the Flash racing. And so when he said, "You have a Superman idea?" Yep, sure do. Got one right here in my back pocket. Any other questions? And sometimes it takes a while. Archie Goodwin used to joke that they'd say, "How do you think up those ideas?" He said, "Like this." And he said, "For the hard ones, I use 2 hands." But yeah, it just depends on degree of difficulty.
Who's your favorite writer or artist to work for when you're at Marvel?
Who's the favorite writer or artist working for me when I was at Marvel?
Yeah.
There are too many good ones. I mean, working with Walt Simonson was great. You didn't have to tell Walt anything. You just sort of, enjoyed what he did. Everything Archie Goodwin wrote was tremendous. I don't know. Roger Stern, the most underrated and most brilliant man, just a great guy. I'll tell you who was difficult to work with was Claremont. He's great. I wrote his introduction to the Hall of Fame. Okay, we're friends. Okay, so it's all right. He was great, but he had his ideas and things he wanted to do, and he'd fight like a Wolverine to have it his way. And most of the time it was his way, because he was great. He did great stuff. Every once in a while he wanted to do something stupid, and I said no. And then we'd fight about it and stuff. It was really funny. He'd argue with me all day. He wasn't afraid of me at all. But if Louise Simonson, she was in earshot, he's arguing with me about something. She'd say, "Chris, do what he says." And he, "Yes, ma'am." He was terrified of Louise. And Ann Nessetti, same deal. Ann Nessetti was trained by Louise, and maybe she taught her. But for instance, I get this question all the time: the death of Phoenix. Okay, so the story there is that Kristen was stuck for a storyline, and the editor, whoever it was, I think Salakro at that time, and me and Chris, we went to lunch at a little Chinese joint downstairs, and we were talking, batting ideas around, getting nowhere. And finally I said to him, Chris, Marvel's had a lot of bad guys who turned good, like Hawkeye, the Black Widow, and some other ones. I said, well, we've never had a good guy go bad and stay that way. And he said, don't say another word. He said, I want to do this all myself. Don't say another word. I said, all right. So then he and Byrne, I guess, well, mostly Chris, but they cooked up this story where Phoenix would go bad, you know, and I read this issue by issue. With the guys I really trusted and thought were great, I didn't interfere at all. You know, I would read the books before they went to the printer, you know. With the newer guys, you know, I would sometimes check in on them, you know, but, you know, if I had a good editor or a good writer, you know, I didn't worry about it that much. I just read it before it went off to the printer. I had to sign them out to go to the printer. Anyway, so I'm reading this story. It's getting really intense. Like, holy cow. You know, and then she blows up a starship. It kills hundreds of people. And then she blows up an entire planet and kills all of these broccoli-headed looking people. And I'm like, holy. So anyway, I went to the editor and I said, what do you have on the rest of this story? And the editor at that time, I think, was Louise. She said, well, I have some work in progress on 2 issues, and I have a plot for the last one. I haven't even read it yet. And I said, okay, let me see. So I read the issues, and it's more and more intense. It's just incredible, building to an incredible climax. And then the plot for the last issue, Chris had the Shi'ar captured Phoenix somehow. And they put her in this machine that kind of fixes what's wrong in her mind, you know, makes her a good person again. And then they let her go. She goes back to Westchester, and she's an X-Man, and, you know, lives happily ever after. I said, Chris, I said, you don't just blow up a planet. And, oh, I feel better now. It's okay. You know, I mean, there's going to be some repercussions. You don't just blow up a starship. What about the families of the people who were on that starship? They'd be a little peeved. You know, they wouldn't say, oh, she's okay now. No. And he said, well, you know, you have some kind of, you know, moral imperative here. I said, no, it's a bad ending for a great story. The ending just, you know, coughs up blood. This is stupid. So he argues with me for a while, and then he said, well, what do you want? I said, well, you know, there have to be some consequences. There has to be something's at stake, and there's a consequence. I said, you know, maybe she goes to intergalactic prison or something. He said, no, the X-Men are keep trying to rescue her. I said, baloney, not on my watch, pal. But, okay, it's your turn. You don't like that? You come up with something. Next morning he comes in, he stands in the door to my office, he says, I'm gonna kill her. And I said, deal. I said, you do that right, and that will be a great end, you know? And he says to me, what do you mean? You can't kill her. I said, I'm not killing her, you're killing her. And so we get in a stupid reverse argument, and then he runs out. And 10 seconds later, the phone rings, and it's John Byrne calling me from Canada. He said, the first words, are you out of your mind? I said, no, just made a deal with Chris, get to work. And so, okay, then they were kind of stuck with it. And so, but they knocked it out of the park, didn't they? I mean, what a book. They should read that book. Holy cow. And they redeem her at the end a little. And wow. I mean, that book, that sales of that book took X-Men from middle of the pack to top of the industry, where it stayed for 20 years. Okay? Pretty good, I'd say. I think they just really did a great job on that, and it was fantastic.
Okay, so I wanted to ask if you remember having like a family member or a friend introduce you to comic books.
Family member or friend. When I was a kid, comics were everywhere. No one had to introduce you. They were in the supermarkets. They were in every store you went into had a comic book rack. They were everywhere. So they were all around. My mother would read comics to me and point at the words. She'd read slowly and point at the words. And I got to the point where I didn't need mommy anymore. I didn't even start first grade yet, but I could read. And so that one little end to that Chris Claremont story is that Chris would always tell the story. Oh, that evil Jim Shooter made me kill Phoenix. You know, and this is my buddy Chris told me. And so one time he was interviewed on camera for a documentary. And he had Louise Simonson sitting on one side of him, and Anna Senti, who was Louise's assistant, sitting on the other side of him. And the question was asked. And I'd already been interviewed for the same documentary separately. And I told the story the way it happened. And so somebody asked him, and he starts on his, oh, that evil Jim Shooter made me kill Phoenix. And Louise turns to him and says, Chris, you know it was your idea. And he can't argue with Louise. You can't win that. So he said, yeah, well, okay. And then he said, well, I thought, though, we're going to do it. Let's do it right. But they did right. They really did right. And now he can't blame it on me anymore. Anyway, yes?
Is there anything you ever regretted doing and why?
Regretted? Well, listen, I made a lot of, I made some dumb decisions. I made some bad judgments. I made mistakes. I think about them all the time. I will say this for me, though. It was never in self-interest. I didn't, steal their money. I didn't sleep with their wife. I didn't kill their dog. Nothing. I mean, I did what I thought my job was, and did the best I could. And if I made a bad-headed judgment or something, okay, that's my fault. And I can give you a list of them. But mostly, just tried to do the right thing. I thought my job was to make good comics. That was what I cared about. And the guys who did their jobs never had a problem with me. The guys who didn't do their jobs, I tried to work it out. If it didn't work out, then either they left, or people think it's like this, hard people over the place. I think in 10 years, I maybe fired 5 people, and they richly deserved it. One of them thanked me. Jim Owsley was an editor for me. His name's now Chris guy, and so he was doing some writing for us, and he had an intern. He'd been a high school intern. So when an assistant editor job opened up, the editor hired him, and then after that, an editor job came up, and the guy was just so good and so creative. I gave him the job as editor. And at first he did fine, because he had this assistant named Adam Blaustein, and Adam was really good at all the bureaucratic part of the job, getting things on time and keeping things organized. And Jim didn't care so much about that. He wanted to do the creative, right? So then Adam had left, had moved away or something, I don't know. No bad blood, he left. And so Jim got another assistant who was a good and creative young man, and but just didn't have those kind of organizational skills, administrative skills. And things started getting late, and things started kind of going off the rails. And so I called Jim into my office, and I said, Jim, I have to fire you. And he said, thank you. I said, but it's getting a raise, because now you can write, and writers make more money than editors do. So anyway, he ended up, doing writing full time then, and doing a great job, and making way more money, and being happier, not having to worry about, schedules, and trying to find artists and all that stuff. So it worked out well. It's the most cheerful firing ever. Anything else? This is supposed to be about the history of Marvel, but anything is the history of Marvel in that era.
On the Superman issue that you talked about earlier, was it your idea to make them tie at the end, or was that something that had to change?
That was an editor. Mort Weisinger very seldom interfered in my stories. I mean, hardly ever changed a word, and in the 5 years I worked for him, I rewrote exactly 4 pages. And the reason I rewrote those pages is because he had approved something in a plot and changed his mind when I wrote the script. And so, and P.S., out of those 4 pages, I was able to save like 2.5 pages of panels and just write new panels. So it wasn't, he was very non-invasive about his editing. Except when I did the Superman thing, when I showed him what I had in mind, I was going to have the Flash win the race. Because I figured it's his only power, give him a break. And so he said, no, he said, it has to be a tie. I said, what? Why? And he said, because we don't want the Superman people to be disappointed or the Flash people to be, just make it a tie. So anyway, I figured out a way, I engineered a way to make it a tie, but they made it a tie on purpose to thwart some villainous scheme right? They both broke the tape at exactly the same microsecond there. But they did it deliberately to make it a tie. So at the end of the story, you really still don't know who's faster, or if they're even, you don't know. And so I haven't read it, but I heard that years later they did another race and they let the Flash win. Is that true? I think so.
Yeah, just barely.
Yeah. So that was cool. So it finally came out the right. That's good.
So, as a writer, were you in charge of, or did you choose your artists to work with you, or was that more of an editor choice?
As a writer at DC or Marvel or what?
Marvel.
Well, at Marvel, you know, I was the boss. I could do anything I wanted. But previous editor-in-chief people would do what you said. They would like get first pick. That came with the office. You know, like Roy Thomas always wanted Joe Rosen to letter his books because Joe lettered small and Roy wrote them. Different other editor-in-chief, they would pick who they wanted. I thought that was kind of an abuse of power. So I made myself a deal that if I was ever going to write anything, I would pick an editor, or somebody would pick an editor, and I would treat them as the editor. Take the editor-in-chief hat off, put a writer hat on, and be the writer, and then not pull rank on them unless they ordered me to kill Aunt May or something. You know, I mean, I did it. I think on Secret Wars, I don't even think they gave me an editor-in-chief credit because DeFalco edited it, and I, you know, let him be the editor. And he picked the artists, he picked the colorists, all that stuff like that. Wrote the cover copy. He wrote copy I would never write because he liked the old Stan Lee kind of extra melodramatic stuff. And I wasn't of that mindset. But you know, things like you know, From the Chaos, a costume, you know. I wouldn't write that, but he did. He was the editor, so I let him be the editor, you know. And so no, I never did at Marvel, although I could have, I suppose. I did pretty good. I got Gil Kane and Klaus Janson a couple of times. I got John Buscema on the Superman Spider-Man book. I got, you know, Mike Zeck and John Beatty on Secret Wars. We had a lot of good guys, and I didn't have to worry too much. They knew me. Any other questions?
How do you feel about Barry Allen, the Flash being murdered or killed in the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths?
How do I feel about Barry Allen, the Flash, being killed at the end of Crisis?
Yeah.
I never read it. No, I mean, people liked it. I'm sure it was good, but I had a lot on my plate right then, and didn't have time to read the competition. Honestly, did not care what they did. I had one guy, one of my editors came to me one time. He says, you know, Andy Yankus, like in-house colors. He's really good friends with Marv and Len. They were both over at DC. He said, I think he's telling them everything we're doing. I said, tell him to invite them all over. They can hear it from me in person. They still can't do what we do. I mean, because they couldn't. We had everybody. Archie couldn't. We signed this thing. Are you kidding me? I said, I'm not worried about it. I said, but we'll do it. We'll do it right, and let the chips fall.
Would you feel like most underrated thing you've ever worked on?
What's the most underrated thing I ever worked on? I always wish the Legion of Superheroes had gotten more attention, because I thought the potential of that book was so big. That's why I wrote my first story was a Legion of Superheroes story, because I wasn't doing this for fun. My family needed the money. I wanted to sell the story. And so I thought, well, what's the most likely target? And out of all the books that I was familiar with, it seemed like the Legion of Superheroes had the most potential, and they were using it the least. It seemed like they were, you know, such a great group of heroes, and Superboy and all stuff like that. It's the future, you can do all kinds of fantastic stuff. And so I thought that was underrated. I think it was still, I don't think, much appreciated as it should have been, whether I was doing it or not. Years later, I think that that should be up there with the X-Men. That should be up there with. It didn't do too bad, by the way. Anybody remember those postal statements of ownership they used to have in the comics? Like every year there'd be a little yellow box and it would tell you the sales of the average sales per issue of the previous year, the sales of the issue closest to filing date, and it would tell you other information about the publisher and this, and it'd tell you how many they printed, stuff like that. There happened to be one of those in my you had to do this every year to keep your second-class mailing privileges for the subscriptions. They were in all magazines that use second-class mailing. In my very first issue that was published of the Legion of Superheroes, there was a postal statement of ownership. And in that postal statement of ownership, it says that the Legion of Superheroes average sales and most current issue were about 500,000 sales. Okay, all right, that's pretty good. And during the whole '60s, DC was just falling. Marvel was rising. Stan, Jack, Steve, all those guys were just really, kicking it. And my last issue I did of Superman or Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, there was also a postal statement of ownership, coincidentally, and it was selling 500,000 copies. So I didn't improve it, but I held my own, which at a time when Superman fell from, during that same time, Superman fell from 1.2 million to about 400,000 during the same period. Superboy fell down into the cancellation area. Most DC comics were not doing too well, and Marvel was on the rise. But I held my own. I think the reason is because I copied Stan. I found out that, like DC, I asked about continuity, and I was told by the editor, we don't do that. Okay. In other words, you could read 100 Superman stories in any order, and it didn't make any difference. Okay. So I thought, I own the future. I said, wait a minute, I got the only book that's set 1,000 years in the future. I own the future. I can do my own continuity. I won't bother anybody. No one else would be screwed up because of me. So I started doing it, and the editor, he could see what I was doing, but he didn't complain because the book was doing okay. And so I did my own continuity and did my pale imitation of Stan Lee, and it was good enough to keep the book afloat. And it did pretty good. And it also taught me some lessons about what to do and what not to do. Learned a lot there. Anyway, any other questions?
Out of the entire Legion, who's your favorite Legionnaire?
Who's my favorite Legionnaire? I guess Karate Kid. He was fun. When I started on the Legion of Superheroes, it was all these people whose power was to point at something, and something would happen. Like it would get heavy, or it would, a lightning bolt would come out, or something like that. It was all pointing powers. So my first issue, I introduced some more visual characters. Karate Kid, the name says it all. Pharaoh Lad, who was strong and all this. It was like Colossus before there was Colossus. And at least Princess Projector was at least visual, made illusions. And the other one was the bad guy. But that, I was just trying to make more, again, sort of influenced by Marvel. I wanted somebody to do something physical, somebody to knock down a wall, And hey, did you ever see the Karate Kid movies? I'm sure you have. Karate Kid movies, Columbia Pictures. If you look carefully, at the end of the movie, there's a copyright notice, DC Comics. Okay? They had to license the name Karate Kid from DC so they could use it for their movie. And so DC, I guess to this day, gets a little royalty for that. I don't do anything, but they get it. So that was cool. Actually, I was called to testify in federal court once. Some guy alleged that he had created Karate Kid in 1968, and that the Columbia Pictures owed him millions of dollars. And they brought me in on the stand. I held up my first issue, and I said, 1965. And so they won. I mean, the Columbia Pictures won, and they took me out to dinner. That was nice. Anyway, any other questions or silly stories you want to hear?
Is there any particular character you found more difficult to write than another?
Any particular character who was more difficult? Right. Yes. Some characters require some specific knowledge. For instance, I had to do a lot of reading about karate. first that was difficult. Also, I don't know how long it would have taken me to write a G.I. Joe with all the technical stuff in there, or an issue of the Nom, because it had to be right. And so yeah, some of those are hard. A lot of people say, oh, Superman is really hard to write. Now, grant you, it's a little more difficult when the guy is that super. Most writers, their trick is, the way they approach it is they depower him, and they don't like the Boy Scout aspect of him, so they make him petulant, and vengeful, and jealous, and violent, and that's not Superman. No, he's Sir Galahad, you know? Is it tough to write interesting stories about Sir Galahad? Maybe it is, but that just means you need a better writer. You need somebody who can get into that mindset. There's plenty of ways to challenge Superman that don't require, making him weak or inventing kryptonite or something. And so you might say it was harder, but I think that it's sort of how hard are you willing to work? And if you're willing to put the work into it, fine. I also did a lot of freelance science and stuff. Did good, solid science videos.
Who's your favorite character you've ever worked on?
It's the favorite character I ever worked on. I loved working on Spider-Man. It was when I was a little kid. I thought that was just the greatest. And I got to write the Spider-Man newspaper strip with Stan. He, at that point in his life, he didn't want to work all that hard. And so he hired me to write the story, like a plot, okay, for the thing, and break it down panel by panel. And because I'm me, it was easier for me to draw little scribble sketches than it was to describe the action in words. So I did little crummy layouts for everything. The layouts were going to be interpreted by John Romita. You do not need to give him a whole lot of information. Just get across what's supposed to go on. And and Stan liked that. He liked the little layouts, and he liked the stories, and then he would write the dialogue, and of course supervise the whole thing. And John did a tremendous job on the art, and it was great. So that was, I did that for almost 2 years. That was good. I learned a lot because you was meeting with Stan several times a week to talk about it, and learn a lot just talking to him. The guy was really good. He's an amazing man. Anybody else got another question? Here. All right, next. You're next. Whoever said something over here, you're next.
No, not like with the death of Phoenix and all that. Was there ever like a major character that's a writer really hard to kill if you just do good?
Did I ever tell a writer that no, you couldn't kill somebody?
Was there one that they really pushed for?
Well, there was one I caved in on, I'll tell you. There was Danny O'Neill was the editor of Daredevil. Danny, of course, is a great writer. And Frank Miller was working on it, and he had created this character, Elektra. And it was great. People loved it. It was wonderful. And so one day, Danny O'Neill, I told the guys, I said, look, if you're ever going to make any big changes, come and tell me, will you? And so they came into my office, and they said they wanted to kill Elektra. I said, why? It's a good character, but why? And no, don't do it. So anyway, they argued a little bit, and I just said no. And then finally, Frank sitting there all the time, he finally says, let me tell you the story. And he told me this story, and it was so good. I'm like, we can't not do that. It's genius, and it's great. I said, all right, guys, but dead is dead. Dead is dead. She stays dead. So anyway, 3 months later, they come into my office. They said, we want to bring Elektra back. I said, no, dead is dead. And so Frank says, let me tell you the story. And he tells me this story where 100 ninjas have to give up their lives to reanimate her, and you're not really sure if it's her in there anymore. And it's spooky and it's weird. I said, I give up. I surrender. You're a force of nature. Do your thing. So, he really was. Guy's just a genius. Just amazing. Anybody else?
Thank you. I was just going to ask, what was your role in the annual events?
What, the giant crossovers?
Yeah, well, there was, I can't think of it right now. I'm drawing a blank. The first one, Secret Wars.
Yeah, Secret Wars.
And then they just started coming yearly.
Yeah,
What was your role?
my role in Secret Wars was, starts with Kenner. Kenner wanted to try superhero toys. So, of course, they go to DC Comics, and they licensed all their characters. Well, the toy companies all spy on each other, okay? And so Mattel hears about this, and they decided that they should have a line of superhero toys. Well, who's left? Us. So they came over, they talked to our licensing people first, and the executives upstairs at Marvel, none of them had ever actually opened a comic book. They had no idea who the characters were. They're probably the worst bunch of executives ever put together. I had the licensing lady call me up one time. She said, "I just made the greatest deal for Wonder Woman." And I said, "Gail, we don't own Wonder Woman." What do you mean we don't? I said, "That's DC. Maybe you should find out who we own." Another lady, the vice president of promotions, she called me up and she says, "How many stories in the comic books? 4 or 5? I said, "Nancy, it's one, and sometimes it's continued. You should open one sometimes." And anyway, so they have this meeting with licensing people, and they're saying, well, the Mattel people say, well, who you got? And so these people are looking at lists and saying, well, we got Ghost Rider, and we got Daredevil, and they're like, who? And so anyway. Of course, I'm called in the meeting. That's why I got to go to a lot of meetings, to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair. I was the only guy who could answer the questions. And so the president never opened the comic book. He was not even sure how to read them. So anyway, I'm called to this meeting. I said, no, we have great characters. I said, they said, yeah, but everybody in the world knows who Superman, Batman, Robin, and Wonder Woman are. Even your Spider-Man and the Hulk have been on TV, but how well known something is what's called its Q score, okay? So their Q scores are off the chart. Ours, even Spider-Man and the Hulk would have been on TV, not as high. I said, no, but ours are great characters. I said, and in our market, the people who really, really care about the superheroes, we outsell DC 5 to 1. 5 to 1. So everybody in the core market knows the character really well. And they said, okay, all right. Could you do something to get a lot of publicity? So that when we launch the toy, as many people as possible in the outside world, not the civilian world, not us people, could get introduced to these characters. And I said, all right, how about this? We do one giant story, 12 issues long. I said, and in it we have all the major villains, all the major heroes, epic, and probably sell real well, and we'll get you publicity. They said, great, all right. So they went and did it. They didn't interfere with us at all. They didn't really care about what we did. They just wanted publicity. They wanted our heroes to be better known. And okay, so I had free hand. I could do whatever I wanted, and just try to make it as good as I could. And so among the and I was trying to think, all right, these guys are all going off to a war. In continuity, it happens between the December books and the January books. 12 issues fall in between those months. So the characters leave in December and have this war, and then come back in January. And I thought, nobody goes through a war and is not somehow changed by it, psychologically or physically or whatever. And so I started thinking, well, what would happen to Spider-Man? What would happen? And I came up with a bunch of stuff, like the Thing doesn't come back, because he finds out he can turn back into Ben Grimm there, and he can't back home. Spider-Man comes back wearing a different costume, and several other changes. And so we started doing that. Mike Zeck designed the costume, the black Spider-Man costume, 8 months before Ron Friends ever drew it. He's the guy who designed it. Don't believe anything else. And he said, what do you want? I said, black costume. You're Mike Zeck. Figure it out. And because you don't have to tell him anything. mean, he knows what he's doing. And so he made exactly one design, and it's still with us almost 40 years later. It's still around. And also other writers made it into Venom, and that's still around. That's really cool. Anyway, so sure enough, when that issue, first issue was seen in was Spider-Man 252. Mike's issue didn't appear until August of that year. It was January, so it appeared in August. And man, my phone's ringing off the hook. All the wire services, newspapers across the country, Los Angeles Times, the Miami Herald, Cleveland Plain Dealer, all the 3 New York papers, radio, TV, the wire services, my God. So it was like national news, got them the publicity they want, exactly coincided with their report there. That helped a lot. And then the appearance in Secret Wars exactly coincided with their sales effort on the big ticket items, the play sets and things like that. So it worked out really well for them, and our toy actually outsold DC's and by a wide margin. So they were pleased, I was pleased, and I thought, well, you know, they wanted it, we did the best we could, it all worked out. What really worked out, though, was that people said, hey, that's a good idea. And so everybody started doing the big crossovers, like it became a summer event for everybody. And usually they didn't want to work as hard as we did. We worked like hell to make sure that it was all in continuity. You know, Chris had a storyline running with Kitty Pryde, and he said, you know, I want to finish that myself, and if she's off with, you know, in Secret Wars, then you'll have to kind of finish it for me. I said, okay, we'll leave her home. I said, you do that? I said, yeah, of course. You know, I'm trying not to be a bozo, but, you know, I'm trying to work with everybody. And so I said, and also I have Colossus have an affair with this other girl on Battle World. He said, plays right into my hands. So we, you know, collegially worked out some good stuff. And, you know, it did well anyway, but most people didn't want to work on the continuity that hard. They just take a bunch of characters, put them off to the side, they have some adventure, and sell well because there are a lot of characters in it. And it became an annual event. I did Secret Wars 2 a different way because I didn't want to keep doing the same thing. Instead of having it in the middle between 2 months, I had it contemporaneous with the issues that was coming out. And when I did it at Valiant, I did it another way. The crossover took place within the books. Didn't have to buy anything extra. There was an epilogue and a prologue and an epilogue, which we gave away free to any comic book. So you didn't have to buy anything new. And the idea was you'd be able to read, even if you didn't read all the books, you just read Archer and Armstrong, and it would still make sense. You could still follow it. What I hope was you want to read the rest of it. But anyway, are we done? All right, 3 minutes to go. Anybody have a good question? All right, there, you.
How did you come up with, or what was your inspiration back when you started out with DC with the character of Parasite?
The Parasite. Okay, well, see, Mort Weisinger again called me and he said, I need a Superman story. And well, you got anything? And I said, I will, you know, just give me a day or two. And so I was ninth grade. It was in biology 1 in ninth grade. I was sitting there trying to think up a villain for Superman, because Superman didn't have many new villains. That was one of the problems. I mean, you had Lex Luthor and who else? What, Toyman? Give me a break. Anyway, there weren't a lot of Superman villains, so I thought the first thing I want to do is create a new villain to make the story. And we're sitting there in biology class studying parasites. And I'm like, parasite! and the teacher looks at me funny. And so you know, that was where the idea came from. And I created the Parasite. And it's still around. They like it. I guess it's still around.
Is there anything you're currently working on in the near future?
Anything I'm working on? Well, Eric Stevenson at Image has given me sort of a carte blanche. The first thing he wanted me to do was write a how-to book. You know, because I didn't invent anything, but I collected a lot of wisdom in the ancients. I talked to all those guys. I learned so much from you know, I worked with Jack, I worked with Steve, I worked with Wally Wood, Bill Kane, you know, Stan, you know, so, and I paid attention every word they said. And he wants me to write it all down. You know, okay. So I think there'll be a book coming out next year. It's sort of a how-to book. And then after that, he said, anything you want. I said, okay, all right. I have a bunch of stuff, and I didn't want to just pick one, so I sent a bunch of stuff to him so he can weigh in, tell me what he thinks might go. So that's probably the next big project I'm doing. In the meantime, I've been doing, I wrote a screen treatment originally for a movie. I was asked to do this and was paid for it. That's rare. Usually they don't pay for treatments. Usually that's all expected. But they wanted me, and they paid me to do it, and paid me well. And if nothing else ever comes of it, that's that was fine. But I think something might come of it, because the guy who's doing this project is he owns the Terminator franchise, and that's not all he does. He makes other stuff. You see that Sarah Connor thing was on TV? That was him. His name is Victor Kubitschek. Anyway, he's a reasonable sized big shot in Hollywood, and he decided that instead of a movie, he'd rather pitch it as like a Netflix series. Now, there's several people who do that does long TV shows, Amazon and HBO. Who you know better than I. So he has a little. We've got a lot of interest in maybe they'll one of them snap up. I never believe anything until the check clears, but that's been keeping me busy for a while. I also have gotten into. There's not a lot of room in the comics field right now. There's fewer books, and they don't pay. We got to the point where when I was around, guys were making real good money, and they're getting royalties and all that stuff. And nowadays, like I Rex Morales and asked him what his rate was once, and he told me, and he said, well, it's actually kind of a lie. He said that was the rate it used to be. He said now it's a third of it. They cut the rates because they're not selling any books. It's not the way to sell more books, is it? Anyway, so there's really not much opportunity in the regular comics field right now. I do a couple of indie things, usually for free, because they're fun, and those guys don't have any money. And I do a little bit of freelance creation and advertising stuff, usually comics-oriented stuff, like somebody wants a spokes tune for their company or whatever. And then I recently gotten into sort of the script doctoring business, where people will send me stuff now, various levels of involvement, and I'll either just give them a critique or I'll give them a rewrite if they want, anything in between. So that's been keeping me out of the table. That's about it. But there should be some stuff coming out next year, maybe. I hope. If so, I hope you like it. Anyway, here we go. Are we done? We're done.
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't.
I used to fuck guys like you in prison.